Quick note before we kick off this week, folks. This week's story is strong stuff. It explores very specific familial grief. So if that sounds like something which you don't want to be too much of a part of, and I am trying to maintain spoiler space here as well, then trust us, we'll still be here next week, and episode 600's a belter. PseudoPod, episode 599, June 15th, 2018. This week's story, The Boy with the Glass Eyes by J.L. Flannery.
Lead me to a lonely place, dressed for opening time. Show me bleeding where my love burns you breathing fire.
Hello everyone, welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alasdair, your host, and this week's story comes to us from J.L. Flannery. J.L. lives in Warwickshire in England with her husband Nathan. She loves Japanese pop culture, crochet and video games, and has just completed her Lovecraft-inspired debut, The Melancholy Secrets of Seafret House, and is actively seeking agent representation. You can read more about her and her book on jlflannery.com or chat to her on Twitter at kerfuffle. Your reader for this week is pretty much podcast royalty. Paul S. Jenkins is one of the best voices in the business, and it's always an honour and a pleasure to have him on the show, and this week is no exception. Thanks for doing this for us, Paul. So, get ready, because John has a package for Alice, and we have a story for you, and we promise you, it's true.
The Boy with the Glass Eyes by J.L. Flannery. Narrated by Paul S. Jenkins. My son arrived in a brown cardboard package no bigger than a shoebox. I lifted the lid to see him lying there flat on his back, eyes closed, as though he were asleep. "Go on," my boss said. "Lift him up." Nervously, I lifted him up out of the box and cradled him in my arms. His skin was velvet, his smell pure talcum powder. I looked down at his sleeping face and put on a smile, pretending the nausea that was rising in my throat didn't exist. My boss, Mr. Yamamoto, stood staring, waiting for me to react. "It's incredibly lifelike," I said in Japanese. He nodded, "Just like a real baby. Go ahead, power it up." I hesitated a moment. What on earth would Alice say when I brought this thing home with me? "It's a great privilege to be chosen," Mr. Yamamoto said, smiling, as if he could sense my unease. I nodded. "Yes, I know. Thank you. I'm very grateful about it. Honest I am. It's just..." "It's just what?" "Nothing," I said. "It's nothing." And I held down the button on the base of its spine, and the baby woke up. Slowly his eyes opened, and he turned his head to look at me with his blue eyes made of glass. "The baby will be on at all times," Mr. Yamamoto explained. "The light at the base of his spine will glow green to tell you it's on. He'll automatically go into shutdown mode at night once the room is dark. If you need to, you can force shutdown mode by putting him back in his box." I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. The baby I held in my arms was smiling at me, a big, gummy smile. As far as AIs go, this was the most remarkable I'd seen. It looked like a real baby. Its skin felt soft like a baby's. Hell, it even had the same scent as one. I was fascinated and disturbed in equal measure. "Your wife will enjoy having him for the weekend, I'm sure," Mr. Yamamoto said, smiling proudly. "Oh yes," I lied. "I'm sure it will make her very happy." It was my idea to move to Tokyo. At the time, my wife, Alice, wasn't so keen. If you have never been there, the experience is hard to describe, but I'll try my best. Neon buildings grow out of the concrete, stretching up to reach the sky. Zebra crossings zigzag in all directions, whilst people in their thousands march across in total silence. Cartoon characters stare back at you everywhere you look. On a subway pass, on manhole covers, on shop signs, on crisp packets and tourist leaflets. Boys wear eyeliner and T-shirts emblazoned with nonsensical English. Girls wear ghostly white makeup and bo-peep dresses, giggling like porcelain dolls come to life. Dogs wear bows and sequin outfits. In one corner of Tokyo, Roppongi Hills, a giant spider stands, keeping watch over the city. In Odaiba, a giant Gundam robot. Toilets flush themselves. Hotels' rooms are space-age capsules. Stepping into Tokyo feels like stepping into the future. We visited there when we first got married, and I'm pretty sure Alice loved it as much as I did. After visiting Tokyo, England lost its shine. It was difficult to hide our irritation at people talking loudly on public transport, the lateness of just about everything, and the general selfishness of people. When it was cold and rainy at home, we longed for the sun and cherry blossoms of Japan. And, of course, we'd just lost the baby. Jasper was only 2 weeks old when he died. Alice gave birth to him at only 28 weeks, and, if I'm honest, I knew as soon as I saw him that he was going to die. He looked too tiny, too fragile to live. I would sit for hours at his bedside, just watching him lying there in the incubator, struggling to breathe in. Every time he breathed, he made this awful rasping noise. The doctors said even if he had survived, he would have had respiratory problems for the rest of his life. The first time I got to hold our baby in my arms, he was already dead. We dressed him in the blue flannel sleep suit Alice had bought for him, and we took photos together as if he was still alive, and we were a normal family. Jasper looks just like a doll cradled in our arms. Depression washed over both of us for a long time, but for Alice it was much worse. I was scared she was going to let grief wash her away completely. She refused to get out of bed. She cried all day long. She blamed herself for Jasper's death, even though it was nobody's fault. For a while I was scared to leave her alone for fear she would hurt herself, but gradually with time, and with medication, her grief began to ease a little, and that was when I suggested we came to Tokyo. It was meant to be a new beginning, a way to forget. The night I brought the AI home, I couldn't bring myself to tell Alice straight away. I left the baby in its box in the hallway of our apartment, whilst I thought of a tactful way to break the news. I waited until we'd both finished eating dinner before I told her about him. She listened to my explanation, and instead of bursting into tears, like I thought she would, she seemed enthusiastic about the idea. "Well, bring it inside," she said, smiling. "You can't just leave him outside, John. What if your boss found out you'd left his prototype in an apartment hallway?" So I brought the box inside and placed it on the kitchen table. "You ready?" She looked back at me and nodded. As soon as I lifted the lid, I saw the look of surprise in her eyes. She was expecting Astro Boy, not a doll so realistic it could pass for a real human baby. She reached out slowly to stroke its soft blonde hair, and the baby writhed and held up its arms. Alice jumped back from the box, afraid, but then she moved forward again and picked him up, laughing nervously at herself for having been startled. The baby gurgled in her arms. "Wow, John, this is unbelievable," she said. It was the first time in 18 months I had seen her smile like that. I thought then that it would all work out okay after all. But I was wrong. That night, as the sun set and the room grew dim, the baby did just as Mr. Yamamoto said it would, and powered down. Its movements slowly stiffened and eventually came to a stop. I watched Alice's face change from contentment to panic, and I quickly snatched the baby away from her and carried it over to its box. "It's okay, it's meant to do that," I reassured her. "It's powering down for the night." But as I stood putting the baby in the box with my back turned, I felt that feeling of nausea return again. I knew what Alice was thinking. When the baby went still and stiff, it looked as though it was dead. It looked just like Jasper. I put the lid on the box and turned to her. "Are you okay having him here?" "Sure, I'm fine. I was just scared for a moment that I'd broken it, that's all. He's beautiful, John. He's just so real." "I know." I moved towards her and pulled her close to my chest. Her hair smelled of cherry shampoo, and I kissed the top of her head. She looked back up at me with those big brown doe eyes of hers, and we kissed. I'm not going to give all the juicy details of what happened next, but we had sex for the first time in weeks, and I finally relaxed, wondering how I could have hesitated in bringing this baby home. I woke up in the night. The clock said 3:30 a.m., and the other side of the bed was cold. Alice was missing. I got up and found her, sat downstairs at the table in the dark, her back turned to me. "Ali, you all right?" She jumped round. "Shit, John, don't sneak up like that. You scared me to death." "Well, I'm not the one roaming the house in the middle of the night. You scared me, shuffling about down here." She sighed. "I couldn't sleep. I keep hearing it crying." I shook my head. "It doesn't cry, Alice. Mr. Yamamoto said the developers thought it might put people off." She still looked unconvinced, so I stood behind her, rubbing her shoulders the way she liked me to, and tried to reassure her. "Baby's cries are as loud as a road drill. If it cried, which it can't, I would have heard it too." "Are you sure? I swear, John, I heard it." I'd already explained to her how it worked. I couldn't see what else there was left to say. The baby couldn't cry. End of story. I stopped rubbing her shoulders. "It must be someone else's kid. Next door's, maybe. You know how thin the walls are here. Come on, Ali, it's late. Just close the damn lid and come back to bed." I watched her get up from her seat and close the lid of the box. I followed behind her as she climbed the stairs. I was knackered the following morning, and like most people, when I'm tired, I'm easily irritated. I took a shower and got dressed, leaving Alice to take the baby out of the box and make breakfast. When I came downstairs, I found she had taken the red sports bag from the garage and was knelt down with it unzipped, its guts spilling out onto the tatami mat floor. I knew what she was looking for in there, the blue flannel sleep suit Jasper had worn. I couldn't bear to see it again. "Why'd you bring these with you? I thought you had thrown those things away," I snapped. But Alice didn't look up. She was transfixed by the contents of the bag and was pulling them out one after another, like a magician pulling never-ending handkerchiefs from a hat. Those things were our son's clothes that he never got to wear. Of course I kept them. Why wouldn't I? I stood by, watching her sifting through them as she pulled out each piece of clothing and held it up to inspect each piece for its suitability. All the time, the baby writhed around next to her on the mat, like a baby that was alive. It dawned on me how absurd the whole thing was. She was sorting out our dead baby's clothes for a doll, and saw nothing wrong with it at all. I could have killed for a cigarette right then, only I knew she would start going on at me if I lit one up in the flat. "Ah, here it is." She held up the blue flannel sleep suit. "You're not really going to dress it in that, are you?" I could hear my voice shaking as I spoke. "Why not?" she said. I wanted to say things like, "Because it's wrong, because that way you'll never let go of the past, because we both know they belong to Jasper and this is just a lifeless, soulless doll that could never replace our baby boy." But of course, I never said anything. Maybe you think I was being unfair. After all, she was a woman who'd lost a child. What was the point of making a fuss? It's only clothes, right? Wrong. In Japan, some believe that everything you own has an imprint of your soul on it, as if some part of you rubs off on it when you touch it, even clothes. That's why you won't find a charity shop anywhere in Tokyo. It's also one of the reasons why nobody steals anything. Why would you want to own something that had traces of someone else's soul all over it? I'll give you an example. There's a famous doll called Okiku in Menenji Temple in Iwamizara, whose owner died in the 1930s from fever when she was just 3 years old. Because the girl carried Okiku everywhere with her, it's believed that the girl's spirit possessed the doll the second she died. But that's not the worst of it. To this day, the doll's hair keeps on growing as if the doll were alive and breathing. So to use your dead child's clothes to dress a toy, well, you can see how that might be a problem for some people. For me, after the disagreement over the sleep suit, I went for a walk around the block to get some air. And by air, I mean smoke a cigarette. I knew how Alice hated my smoking, so I held each drag of the cigarette deep in my lungs until it burned, and when I exhaled, I puffed out smoke rings in defiance. When I got back to the apartment, I was expecting her to smell the smoke on me and start another fight, but I could hear her in the bathroom retching, and my petty rebellion was quickly forgotten. I felt guilty now that I had left her, even for that short amount of time. I knocked on the bathroom door. "Ali, you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." She opened the door, her eyes watery and her hair unkempt. I don't know what caused that. I was just sat there with the baby, and all of a sudden I pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I'm sorry I was such an arsehole earlier." She wriggled out of my grasp. "It doesn't matter. Hey, you should see the baby now. It started sitting up while you were gone." I don't know why this bothered me so much. It was an AI after all, which meant it was supposed to learn and develop and grow, just like a real baby. Only real babies don't sit up after just a day. We went together into the living room, and there it was just sat on the mat playing with a ball Alice found in the garage. The sports bag was gone, but it was wearing the blue sleep suit. When I walked into the room, its head turned and its glassy eyes looked right at me. "Amazing, isn't it?" Alice knelt down and started using that baby voice women always reserve for the ears of tiny puppies and small children. "Aren't you a clever one? Mama's special boy?" The hairs on my neck prickled to watch my wife talk to it like that, as if it was real. Mr. Yamamoto had been right. Childless women the world over would fall in love with this AI. And then it dawned on me. After all this time trying to prove to my boss that I wasn't just another worthless foreigner, all I had to do to prove my worth was bring this baby home and tell the company it was a success. I might even get a promotion. And yet, something about the whole thing made me uneasy. When Alice gets a craving for something, there's nothing that will stop her until she gets it. That day she was desperate for some freshly baked donuts. "I don't know, Ali," I moaned. "It's pissing down outside. Can't we go another day?" "You stay here," she said, tying up her laces. "You and the baby can get to know one another." When she was gone, the baby gave a giggle. I picked it up and put it on my lap. It didn't feel like a real baby. It was too heavy. I tipped it upside down and held it by the leg to see what it would do, but it began to frown, so I quickly turned it the right way up. Then I felt stupid for being momentarily manipulated into thinking the damn thing was real. "You're just a piece of metal in there," I said to it. The baby wrinkled its nose at me. "You're not real." It gave a grin. Alice returned with a box of 6 donuts, and she ate them all, one after another. "Do you remember the last time I craved these? It was when I was pregnant. Isn't that weird?" "Yeah, honey, I guess it is." I suppose the alarm bells should have been ringing then. Vomiting, cravings. It was like that AI was causing her to relive the pregnancy all over again. I started thinking of how I could get out of this. Perhaps I should call my boss, just explain that we had lost a baby, and that my wife has had severe anxiety and depression, and that this could possibly bring about a relapse. I did think about doing it, but then I saw how happy she looked, so I didn't. That night, Alice woke me up. "I can hear him, John," she kept saying. "Can't you hear him? He's crying. He's making that rasping noise, just like Jasper did." I didn't really know what to say. I mean, I couldn't hear the noises she claimed she could, and I'd already explained it couldn't cry. It was impossible. It hadn't been programmed to. I held her tight in my arms. "Hush now, Alice, it's okay. You must have had a bad dream, that's all. Listen." She lay there in my arms, both of us listening to the silence. "See," I said, "it was just a dream." She wiped away her tears, and I stroked her hair until she seemed calmer. "I'm so sorry, John," she whined. "I just don't know what's happening to me. You know, if it's too much having the baby here, I could power it down. My boss wouldn't even have to know." "No," she answered far too eagerly. "Don't switch him off, John. I'm fine, honestly. It's like you said, it was just a dream, that's all." She turned onto her side, and I lay down on my back, staring at the ceiling, waiting for her to drift off. It was making her ill again. It was clear for anyone to see. Once I heard her snoring, I started to relax a little. I lay there for a while thinking of what to do. And that's when I heard it too, the crying. For a moment I thought I was imagining it. I looked over at Alice, but she was fast asleep. There it was again, the sound of a baby crying in our apartment. My stomach somersaulted, and I lay there frozen to the spot. What if the Japanese were right? What if that baby had somehow obtained the spirit of my dead boy wearing that damn sleep suit? It was a completely irrational thought, I knew, and yet... I got up out of bed and slowly, so as not to wake Alice, opened the door and listened. The crying had stopped, but there was a scuttling sound, like someone running across the floorboards. It couldn't be the baby, I told myself. That was impossible. I tiptoed down the stairs, heart pounding. I didn't switch on the light. I was worried it would wake my already anxious wife. If that happened, how would I explain it? I could hardly say that I heard it crying too. That would tip her right over the edge. When I got to the bottom step, something rushed past me, giggling. The baby had obviously learned to walk. I stepped down and tried to see it in the dim light, but it was hiding. "Hey, baby," I whispered to it. "Dada's here to see you." I heard it rustling around in the bin, pulling out Alice's donut box and dropping it onto the floor. I pulled open the drawer in the table and fumbled for the emergency torch we kept there. When I switched it on and flashed it around the room, I could see him. He was standing there in the corner of the room. He was looking straight at me with those glass eyes. "Come on now, baby," I said in a sing-song voice. "Come to Dada." He started walking towards me with his arms outstretched and that grin on his face. I picked him up. "Gotcha." "John, what are you doing?" I turned to see the figure of Alice on the stairs. She switched on the light, and as she did so, I could have sworn the damn thing sunk its teeth into me. Little shit! I dropped it, and it bounced onto the mat. Alice dashed over and picked it up. "Jesus, John, it's just a baby." "Just a baby, like hell it was." "There's something wrong with it," I said to her as calmly as I could manage. "There's a fault somewhere. I need to restart it." Alice was staring at me like I was about to commit murder. "Don't be ridiculous, John. We're not turning him off. How could you even suggest that?" She pulled him closer to her, and the baby snuggled into her chest. "Give him to me, Alice." "No." She held on to him even tighter. I swear I didn't mean to hurt her. I mean, I wanted the baby, sure I did, but only because it was making her paranoid. I lunged forward and pulled at her arms, trying to prise them open so I could get to the baby. "Stop it, John, I won't let you." The baby writhed and wriggled like crazy, but it never made a sound as we fought with one another. I pulled hard until Alice was unable to fight any longer. She let go, and I grabbed hold of its head and pulled him away from her. "No, John, please don't take my little boy." I lay him face down on the table and unzipped his sleep suit, and found the little green light at the base of his spine. I could hear Alice sobbing and begging me not to do it. Believe me, I felt awful, but I knew now I should never have brought the damn thing home in the first place. I dug the tip of my finger into its spine and held it down until the baby grew stiff and still. the green light went out. Alice was shrieking and sobbing, and so I went to her and tried to hold her close, even though she kept pushing me away. "It's okay," I said. "It's okay. It's over." She settled down then and stood weeping quietly into my chest. But it was then, as I stood comforting her, that I saw it move. The damn thing rolled over onto its back and sat up. "Jesus Christ, Alice, that thing's alive!" I pushed Alice out of the way and picked up the AI again. There was no green glowing light, and yet there it was, writhing and wriggling and biting me, fighting to stay alive. I slammed the thing face down onto the table and pushed down hard with my hand to keep it still. Its legs and arms flailed wildly, and I could hear Alice crying out behind me, "John, please, John, stop it, John, you're hurting him." Beneath its soft velvet skin, I could see its blue wires. It was only now that I realized how they looked like human veins underneath that translucent material. I hesitated for a moment and tried to think of another way, but there wasn't one. "It's just a robot," I told myself. "Don't look at it. Don't listen to Alice. It's just a robot." I dug my nails into the soft pink skin on its back, and I tore it open. The baby let out an ear-piercing shriek, one long, shrill note. Alice stepped forward, screaming and shrieking, trying to pull me away, but I shook her off, sending her stumbling backwards. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her drop to her knees, and at first I thought she was just upset, distraught at having her baby taken away from her for a second time. "It's not real, just a robot." I shoved my hand into the cavity in the baby's back and gripped the cords as tightly as I could and pulled hard. The baby screamed. Try as I might, the wires just would not break. They stretched out like long laces of licorice. I pulled and I tugged, and there was a sickening sound like tendons snapping as the wires finally came off in my hand. The baby lay on the table, convulsing and shrieking so loudly I had to place my trembling hands over my ears to block out the noise. Eventually the baby gave a final whimper and lay still. I waited a moment to check if it moved again, but it was dead this time. "I'm so sorry, Alice," I said. "I should never have brought it home. I guess I thought—" But Alice wasn't answering. I turned to see her laying on the floor, clutching her stomach. "It's okay, Allie, you'll be okay," I said. "It's not like it was real. It wasn't our Jasper. It was a robot. You're okay, Alice." "Alice?" But Alice couldn't answer. She lay on the tatami mat, blood trickling down her legs, spreading out like a tulip beneath her.
The thing I find myself drawn to more and more with horror at the moment is absence. Context is a lifebelt for readers and listeners alike, and when you go out past the breakers into the place where context is taken away, one of two things happen. You either get lost, or you get swept away too. You see it in movies, especially horror movies, like Hereditary, The Witch, even Pontypool. The removal of context locks you inside the room. It makes you hyper-aware of everything. And that's what works so brilliantly here too, because your awareness is also mired in one particular character's perceptions, self-delusion, and privilege. And before all that, you have to ask yourself a question. What else is here? What are we seeing the consequences of, but not seeing itself? Why this couple? The emphasis on how select the process is seems odd. Why such a deliberately dehumanizing process? Just put your dead artificial child back in the cardboard box is a command that no one on earth is going to take well. What about the fact it goes haywire? Was this faulty merchandise offloaded to willing scapegoats? There is a sense of something ever so slightly Rosemary's Baby here, if you choose to see it, and after all, aren't those the most insidious, attractive conspiracy theories? And they all of them, keep the true horror hidden in plain sight and make the fact it's hidden part of the horror. Alice is fighting and winning her own battles with something unique, intimate and personal. Alice is taking control of her life and being far more aware of what's in their house and what isn't in their house than her husband. Alice is learning to trust herself even as she realizes she can't trust John at the very worst possible time. John's fine. He's a guy. It's his job to be fine. It's his job to be fine with a capital F. It's his job to be fine in block capitals, even as the terror and the grief and the rage compact him down and down and down and turn him into something which only knows how to react and doesn't know that's all it knows how to do. And that brings us to those final lines, where he wakes up. His perceptions shift, where time slows down, where everything falls into place, and all you can hear is your own laboured breathing as the robot baby is forgotten in favour of something much more important and far less robust. The real horror of the story is revealed to have always been there. It's just John, and through John, we haven't seen it until the very worst version of Too Late. This is extraordinary, chilling work. Thank you both. Patronage. Patreonage. One of those is a word. Both are things we do. If you like what we do, please consider donating to us either through PayPal, patronage, or Patreonage. Patreon. Those two words got turned around. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, and good lord do we have a lot of that, with more to come very soon. Alternatively, if you can't afford to donate or support us that way, you can signal boost us. If you have a blog or a podcast that covers our kinds of things, and you could use a guest, get in touch. We would love to chat to you. If there's an episode you particularly liked, tweet about it, Facebook it, LinkedIn to an episode or one of us, any of that stuff. Signal boost us, because here's the thing, the money is vital. Without that we don't exist, but the attention raises profile almost as much. So you can help. And if you want to help, please do. We'll be back next week with episode 600, The Graveyard Rats by Henry Kuttner, narrated by Bob Eccles. Until then, we will remain a production of Escape Artists Incorporated, released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license, and released under, I believe, a 3.0 license. And we will leave you with this quote from what I view as the middle of the excellent Anna Taylor-Joy horror movie trilogy of the last few years. Morgan. Do you know what the cruelest thing you can do to someone you've locked in a room is? Press their face to the window. See you next week, folks.